Starting. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Enrique Sanchez of Spanish United. Today we have a very special guest that's going to be on the show that we're going to be talking about an important topic. It's the Israel and the Hamas war that's going on in the Middle East right now. So would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Sure. My name is Rabbi Mark Sobel. I'm the rabbi of Temple Beth Emet of Burbank. And I've been with the temple 37 years and as the rabbi 27 years. And I'm very happy to talk about it. I've been to Israel 8 times. And if you don't mind, my undergraduate major was Middle Eastern Aryan Language Studies. So I think I have a better background than some.
Okay.
So I'm going to answer all your questions, Enrique.
Perfect. Thank you very much for being on the show.
My honor.
Yes, the topic right now that's going on is the whole thing with the war with Israel and Hamas, and it's a very controversial issue because you have different sides that say that one side is more guilty than the other. You know, I try to be as impartial as possible, even though I have personal beliefs. But the whole point is to be objective and to try to see both sides to see what can be done to try to find a solution to this current war. So my question is, what caused the war to happen? So like, what was the catalyst that caused this war to erupt the way that it is going on right now?
Well, I think most people know the immediate cause of this war was an unprecedented attack by Hamas across the border into Israeli kibbutzim, farming settlements in Israel towns, and also there was a music festival going, and they not just shot at soldiers, there were innocent civilians who were spending the last day of a Jewish holiday very in pleasure and doing pleasurable things. Mm-hmm. And I'm almost sure everybody has seen the videos and the tapes, so I don't think I need to go into it, but it was an act that went beyond anyone's expectations or even fears with the anger and the magnitude of the attack. And it caught the Israelis by surprise. And some people have likened it to 50 years ago when the armies of Egypt and Syria also caught the Israelis by surprise. And it's that same idea. Yes, they were unprepared. And that may have been, frankly, and some on the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, are admitting it was our mistake. We erred. We didn't expect it. And that's the immediate cause of the war. And meanwhile, Israel retaliated as it has in the past, using its Air Force and its drones and the Iron Dome system to protect from the incoming missiles. And right now, the whole world is waiting to see what further the Israeli Defense Forces will do. And being the Gaza Strip is not a military encampment, but in fact is a city by all intents and means. The size of the San Fernando Valley with twice as much population.
Right.
You can understand how crowded it is. So they're waiting to see how they handle warfare that our country, America, is familiar with in the streets of Baghdad, streets of Iraq, and the streets of Afghanistan. So we're all waiting, not happily.
Yeah, I just think it's a horrible thing what's going on, and I've spoken to many people in both camps, and a lot of people have been telling me that, and I'm speaking from from what people have told me, is that what caused the cataclysm with the war in Israel had to do with the settlements that's been going on in the West Bank. So a lot of people believe that among the settlers that are among the many Haredim that are extremists that may have caused the Palestinians to explode and for them to do that.
Okay, I understand what they're saying about linking the settlements and the settlers to Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and I think part of the situation is the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, members of his government, and it's a complex thing about the government, and maybe you'll invite me back when we discuss the Israeli government.
You're my guest.
They were leaning towards settling that part of what is called the West Bank. They sometimes call it Judea and Samaria by its biblical name. and they took the eyes off the Hamas. And Hamas felt it wanted to step up to it. But I think if you really examine the West Bank territory in history and the history of the Gaza Strip, it's very different. And one is a place where there's fertility and settlements, as you've said it, and that. And yet, what you have is you have here the clash of two groups who see the, shall we call it, the biblical land of Israel as their own. And we can talk about that because I think that's important that we get it off on the table and off the table together.
Of course.
The Gaza Strip was part of Egypt. Its connection to the land of Israel is, I wouldn't say dubious is a negative word. Let's just say it's peripheral, not central.
It's minimal compared to the West Bank.
Oh, and how? I mean, there are things. So I agree with those who say the Hamas is rising to the occasion of defending the West Bank. But I think the next question I would ask would be, I'd ask the West Bankers if they really want Hamas to defend for them. And I'm not talking about radicals on both sides. Radicals love anarchy and love the disruption. And we're not even talking about Israel. We can talk about our country these days too.
Right.
But it's a whole different history. And so would you like me to talk a little bit about the West Bank and then we'll go back to
yes,
Gaza?
Please do.
Okay, sure.
Please do.
Okay, the West Bank territory, the reigning, if I want to do Bible, it's very easy for me to say, the Bible says that the Jews, this is the Jewish land. And then you deal, though, with the centuries when Arabs, and I mean it honestly, those groups of people took the land, took is a bad word, settled the land.
Right.
And it goes back and forth and back and forth. So yes, is the Jewish claim to the land biblical? Yeah, and it's actually the Christian claim also, because that's where it comes from. Islam comes a little bit later, but I will say one thing, and then I'm going to step back into my professorial thing.
Be my guest.
When the Muslims came out of the Hejaz, now it's called Saudi Arabia, but it wasn't Saudi Arabia until 1929. But when it came out of the Hejaz, where Mecca and Medina is, they conquered all the way up the coast.
Right.
The Byzantines controlled Jerusalem. If you read Arab documents, who do you think opened the gates for the Muslims to invade?
The Jews. Oh, the Jews? Really?
Yeah, the Jews did. The Greeks were part of the Byzantines. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So, but I don't like doing this because all it does is upset my Muslim friends because, we have a claim to it. Yes, this claim of settlement is powerful. The claim of Bible is, in our case, more powerful. But I can't argue with their claim.
Right.
But there was no Arab sovereignty of the territory, frankly, at all. Now, I'm saying that, and I'm hearing myself say it, and I know how negative it sounds to people. Doesn't mean they didn't settle there. It just means they didn't own the land.
Right.
It was a succession of Turks, the Seljuk Turks, the Mamluk Turks, finally the Ottoman Turks.
Right. The Ottoman Empire.
The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire owned the land by conquest.
Right.
When the Jews arrived, the new Jews, the modern Jewish immigration.
Right. The ones that came from Europe.
Exactly. They had an option. They wanted to live on the land. They wanted to return home with all the mysticism and politics and just be free. You have a man named Herzl who writes a book that says only Jews can be free in their own land and things of this nature.
Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism.
Exactly. So they bought the land. The question was, who do we buy it from? Do we buy it from the Ottoman Turks who own the land, or do we buy it from the tenants? Well, obviously, you buy it from the owners.
Of course.
But it doesn't help the feelings of the Arab felahim, the Arab worker who's working the land.
Right.
So back and forth it goes, back and forth it goes. There are many examples of Jews and Arabs getting together.
Right.
And then there are questions of Jews and Arabs not getting along because people got their feelings hurt.
Right.
Unfortunately, the British come along and...
they captured the territory from the Turks in 1917 in the First World War.
Exactly. And they made a deal. And I'm getting to West Bank. I really am, Enrique.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Take your time.
They made a deal. in 1917, a man by the name of Balfour, their foreign minister, wrote a thing that said His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a Jewish commonwealth in Palestine. And I'm going to talk about Palestine in a minute because I think your audience needs to understand the origin of the name Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, they made a deal with the Sharif of Mecca, the man who was the custodian of Mecca and Medina.
The two holy cities.
Exactly. And they played one side off against the other. Now, Sheriff of Mecca, who happened to be named Hussein, had two sons. One was Faisal and one was Abdullah. The Brits told Faisal that he could have Syria and his brother Abdullah would have Iraq. They forgot to tell the French, and they made an agreement with the French that the French could have Syria. Faisal shows up, and he says, "I'm your king." And the French Foreign Legion says, "Excuse us, sir, not unless you go to the French Foreign Legion."
Right.
And he couldn't, so they kicked him out. He went to Iraq. Abdullah had no kingdom. He went to Winston Churchill, said, like the song, "I ain't got no body, I ain't got no kingdom."
Mm-hmm.
And Winston Churchill, sitting on the balcony of the King David Hotel, split what the League of Nations had given as the Palestinian Mandate.
Mm-hmm.
He split it into two parts. One part he called Transjordan and gave that to Abdullah. And west of the Jordan became Palestine. So immediately it reduced itself probably to about a quarter of what it was. And saying, here, now Jews and Arabs, the quote Palestinian groups, you guys make a settlement and live together.
Right.
And what happened is it didn't work because they were angry both at the British and then at each other. But they tried to work it out. What most people don't know is there was a group of moderate Arabs who wanted to deal with the Jewish population called the Nashashibis. They were destroyed, they were wiped out by the Husseinis, which became the much more radical and spokesman, El-Hajj El-Amin El-Husseini. So now I know you're all saying, "Rabbi, that's great, but you didn't get to the West Bank yet." Well, I did. I will, because the West Bank territory was supposed to be part of the I just drew a blank. In 1947, the partition plan.
The partition of Palestine.
Partition of Palestine. Because the Brits said, we've had enough of these people. They keep fighting with each other and we keep getting in the middle and they got killed. And World War II did a number on them.
Right.
So the partition plan is passed by the United Nations. And what is basically the West Bank territory would have been the Arab state of Palestine.
Right.
And the other areas, Tel Aviv, well, better, whatever city had a majority of population of Jew or Arab, that city went to that group. Mm-hmm. Except for Jerusalem. Jerusalem was internationalized. And please remind me to go over that a little bit later. So anyway, what happened was the finest army in the Middle East was the Arab Legion. The Haganah, the Israeli Defense Forces, did well ultimately. I'm so sorry about that.
Sure, go ahead. Take your time.
And what happened is,
They are the Arab League, right?
Right. They were manned by the Brits, and they were trained by the Brits, and they were the best fighting force. Mm-hmm. They held off the Israelis, and even Ben Gurion didn't know what name to call the country, Judea or Israel. But getting back to it, at the end of the war, what was basically the partition plan, Arab settlements on the West Bank stayed Arab. There were a couple of Arab cities that became Jewish. Nazareth is one, but Bethlehem stayed Arab. What did Hussein do? I'm sorry, what did Abdullah do? Abdullah in 1950 annexed the West Bank and made it part of his kingdom. Didn't call it Palestine anymore. It didn't exist. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Mm. And the annexation has only been recognized by two countries, Great Britain and Pakistan. So now you have those poor people, and I want to recommend to your listeners the best book about the 1948 war I've ever read. It's called Genesis 1948 by Dan Kurtzman. I don't plug, but this one I will, because it's first-person testimonies. And it talked about what happened to the innocents on both sides, the effect of the war on them, mm-hmm. both Arab and Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important because that's where we are now. So now it's it's the beginning of 1949. The war's over. The armistice agreements, no peace treaties, just armistice is signed. And the West Bank basically stays Arab.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in 1967? Well, I don't want to go there. I'll come back to the West Bank, but this is important to me.
Sure.
What happens is the Arab states like having the Palestinians in refugee camps, and the United Nations helps them. No Arab nation, with I think the exception of Kuwait, took people in. And Jordan, which now says this whole territory belongs to me, did they make the Palestinians full citizens of Jordan? No. So what you have is you have
stateless people.
Exactly, stateless people. And what are you going to do? Well, that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the Gaza Strip. Same thing. People flee Palestine. I heard an imam speak, and he said, Israel has occupied the Gaza Strip for 75 years.
Mm-hmm.
I said, no, they haven't. I said, well, they did for one day. The Israelis did. One of the last campaigns of the War of Independence, they took the Gaza Strip for a day. The British got a hold of them and said, if you stay in the Gaza Strip, we're coming from Egypt with British Spitfires and we'll kill you all. Mm-hmm. So they backed off. So the Gaza Strip wasn't part of Israel. Mm-hmm. In 1948.
So what was a part of Egypt?
Egypt.
Okay.
And it stayed part of Egypt till 56. The Israelis marched across the Sinai to defend themselves. And then the United States told them, get out of the Gaza Strip. The same thing the Brits had said, 8 years before. So they got out. Unfortunately, in 67, I believe the Egyptians had enough of the Palestinian refugee camps. Now, the West Bank is green. I've been there. There are cities. There are crops, if I may give an aside.
No, it's fine.
67 war, the Israelis take the West Bank. The two leaders of two cities, Hamdi Kanaan of Nablus and Sheikh al-Jabri of Hebron, come to Moshe Dayan, may all three of them rest in peace, they were good men, and he says, if you don't let our farmers take their produce to market, you will have a civil war. People will rebel because they need the money and they need the food.
Exactly.
So they built bridges. The Israelis repaired the Allenbury Bridge over the Jordan River, and off went this produce to Arab countries. And the Israelis were in charge of the West Bank. They had a man, also Tzvi Ofer, who also was killed actually by terrorists. And they showed, but it's a place that produces olive trees. It produces those wonderful olive wood things you get from Bethlehem, those wonderful statues. I have several in my own. They're gorgeous. What do you think the trees are? But the Gaza Strip is pure wilderness. You look at the pictures. I haven't seen a tree in the explosion in the Gaza Strip. Maybe they are, but I don't see them because they're not there. Mm-hmm. Okay. So one time it got worse and it got worse and it got worse and it got worse. I know I'm rattling on. I apologize. So now we're back to
Hamas.
Well, the Palestinian Authority, I want to go one more step further, is trying to rule the West Bank. But how can you when the propaganda mills are saying if you don't defend with the gun or with the knife, you're not doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. So Hamas grew out of the frustration of 3 generations of refugees. Mm-hmm. Israel is complained. It got it in 67. The Egyptians said, we don't want it anymore. You keep it. The Israelis said, well, if it's going to keep terrorists out, yeah, but it was a bad decision. Not only that, the Israelis are not totally without fault either.
Right.
And from 67 to the mid-70s at least, and maybe before, the Israeli policy was there are no Palestinian people. They are Jordanians. Right. And that is a horrendous mistake. I was in Israel in 1970 when the Black September broke out. And you saw just how much the Jordanians did not like the Palestinians. The Palestinians did not like Jordanians, yet they're supposed to live together. So now bring us up today. I know we're going. Israel, I believe it was 2006. My dates are not, and I didn't write myself down. Left out. They dismantled settlements. They said, you know what, you can have it. We don't want it anymore. And in truth, more Arabs have been killed in the Gaza Strip than Jews by Hamas and the other terrorists.
Yeah, because people don't realize that Hamas is not the Palestinian people, it's just a political entity.
Right.
While the Palestinian people, a great majority of them do not support Hamas.
Right. I hope from my words you hear the same thing. I had an Israeli Arab roommate when I was at university on purpose because I needed someone to help me with my Arabic. And that's the point. There are wonderful, and I don't want to sound condescending, but regular Palestinians, they want to make money, they want to have a business, they want to raise their children, and they want to have everything. But you can't if you're run by a terrorist organization. And you can't if people like contributing money to keep you in squalor.
Mm-hmm.
If they keep, people, well, I do have a thing about Israel, and I hope you don't mind.
Sure, be my guest.
In 1949, when the war broke out, from 1948 rather to 1954, the Arab countries from Algeria to Yemen kicked their Jews out.
Right.
They said, you have Israel now, you go live there. 600,000 individuals came to Israel.
All of the Sephardim and the Mizrahim.
Exactly. And what happened was the same, it's scary sometimes when I look at it. It was the same number roughly, closely, to how many Palestinians in those days were expelled or fled the partition plan.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the Arab countries take them in? Why didn't Jordan take and use, where the Jews left, why didn't they take that money and give education to these people?
Exactly.
What about the Saudis? What about the Kuwaitis? What about the Qataris? So what's happened is there was a total, in historical terms, we refer to the Jews being expelled from the Arab countries coming to Israel, and the Palestinians leaving Israel, or leaving Palestine, I guess to call it, as a population exchange.
Mm-hmm.
If the Arab countries have stepped up and taken them and helped them and given them housing and found places for them, then we wouldn't have this problem because you wouldn't have these gigantic refugee camps.
Especially, and you actually bring up a good point, especially the Persian Gulf countries like Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, United Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. These countries are wealthy, they're stable, and they have the means. And they could have taken all these Palestinians in, especially that they are the same language, same culture, the same religion. Yeah. And one of the reasons why they don't take them in because they don't care, for one. And second, that they want to use them as a bargaining tool against Israel. Exactly. That's basically what it is.
Precisely. They used it and also against the United States as well to say, if you do so much, why don't you? But that's the point. If you care for your fellow religionists, then take care of them. One thing I'm writing columns for my newspaper, one of the things is there are Muslims in Israel who are actually sit on the Israeli Supreme Court. They don't publish it.
Right.
There are Muslim generals who sit in the Israeli army, and there are certainly university professors. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to keep it in Israel, but Israel's not perfect. It had the opportunity after the Six-Day War to say, we open our arms to the Palestinian people, certainly on the West Bank, and let us talk about a Palestinian nation and then go after the other Arab countries to support them and bring them. But no, and you said it well, that the Arab countries, no, we'd rather use them as a pawn, as a thorn in Israel's side, or, and this is the worst part, mm-hmm. as a fertile ground for terrorism.
Right.
There are several Israeli movies that talk about it from the young people. I remember one, I forgot the title. It's two young men have nothing. They're not the handsomest men, so they can't get girls and they can't do this and they can't do that. They go to the recruiter and they become suicide bombers.
Right.
And that's the point. So if you want to settle the situation, and believe me, I do, then everybody's got to step up. And the United Nations too. The United Nations, UNICEF, I'm much older than you, Enrique. Mm-hmm. I remember as a kid, they gave us little milk cartons. Mm-hmm. And we went from house to house on Halloween collecting pennies. And the next day you'd bring it to your teacher and they would the school would make a contribution to UNICEF, United Nations Children's
International Fund.
International Fund. Thank you. So that's the point. Now we're dealing in, as I said, 3 generations of terrorism. Mm-hmm. Not all. I've been with Palestinians. As I said, my roommate I would go to his village in the middle of Israel. Now, Well, do you have any more?
One of the questions that we have for our listeners is: do you believe that with this provocation that Hamas did with Israel, do you think because of Netanyahu's legal problems and scandals that he's had within the Knesset, do you believe he's using this as a justification to stay in power? Because, as you know, many of the right-wing coalition, many of the far-right politicians, like correct me if I'm pronouncing his name right. His name is Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Yeah.
He's part of the right-wing establishment that is basically the puppet master of Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you believe that Netanyahu's coalition government or his cronies are using this as an excuse to keep himself into power and to justify what's going on in Gaza, or you think this is just something that just happened?
No. I think
Coincidental, that is.
no, I don't. Firstly, I don't believe in coincidences. I think that being the head of the Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence services, said, yes, we made mistakes, we blew it. They're going to go further. I think you're going to see an inquiry similar to the inquiry after the Yom Kippur War on that level. He is a master politician. I don't know, but certainly it is in history you read, and America was the same way. You don't change leadership in the middle of a war.
No.
And you're not the first person to say it. An Israeli member of my congregation came up to me and he said exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like Netanyahu got the people together to follow him. I have more faith in people coming to the bottom of it, that in fact there are some problems, and the government, and perhaps he needs to be out of office if they decide so. But I need to step back a little bit. I am not an Israeli citizen.
Right.
I'm an American citizen. So in the words of my teachers, until you carry Israeli citizenship, be very careful what you say. So what I was saying is your listeners' questions are not unheard of amongst Israeli nationals who are very, very, very angry about things. Also, the racism and the bigotry of the people you met, and now I will comment, is made the West Bank much more eruptive than it had been for many, many years. I look at it in the longer run. The government before Netanyahu's government had 3 Arab parties in its ruling, so to speak, government. I feel bad. I saw a turn toward the future, toward Palestinians.
Yes.
Sorry, we have this room reserved.
Yeah, sure. We'll be out in one minute.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I talk so much.
Well, anyway, we just ran out of time, but I want to say, Rabbi, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll definitely continue this conversation. And for those that want to get a hold of me on Spanish United, we're on social media platforms, Spanish United, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and any questions that people have, feel free to reach me. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Can I say one more?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think all of us, the best thing we could do is to pray for the innocent people, both Palestinian, Jewish, and then foreign nationals who are also there. Please, everybody, in your prayers, may the innocents continue to be safe and be innocent, and may, God willing, they all bring home all of them, and pray for peace. As we say, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for the peace of all people in the Middle East.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.